Live from Washington, D.C., this is Transport Topics Newsmakers, the digital interview series that gives you access to candid conversations between industry experts and a veteran reporter. Sponsored by Shell. Here's your host, Dan Ronan.
Hello and welcome to Newsmakers from Transport Topics. I'm Dan Ronan. Our guest is someone who's very well known within the trucking industry. We welcome to the broadcast Chris Spear, the President and CEO of the American Trucking Associations. Before we begin our conversation with Chris, I want to tell you that Shell is the sponsor for this edition of Newsmakers. So let's watch this ad and then we'll be back on the other side with Chris Spear. First, a bit about Chris Spear. He's been the president and CEO at ATA for now going on 6 years. And ATA is the nation's leading organization representing the trucking industry. As president and CEO, he leads the efforts to advocate on behalf of the trucking industry. Prior to his time at ATA, he worked in transportation, energy, labor, and technology in 5 continents. And he also served in the George W. Bush administration as the deputy representative for the Coalition Provisional Authority in Iraq and also an assistant secretary of labor. And also he was a professional staffer in the office, he's proud to say, for United States Senator Alan Simpson of Wyoming. Chris, welcome to Transport Topics Newsmakers. It's been almost 2.5 years of turbulence in the trucking industry because of COVID-19 and the like. Where do you believe the industry is at today? As I said, some 30 months now after the economic fallout that started way back when in February and March of 2020.
Well, I think, Dan, we're starting to see a lot of the impact that the Federal Reserve's decision to raise interest rates is really having. And trucking obviously is the first to see and feel a lot of the economy. And we're starting to see in certain segments the impact of that. And I think it's fueled by 40-year highs in inflation nearing 10%. We're seeing record highs on fuel, even though it's coming down, it's still well over a year ago. And, clearly we've got a shortage of talent. You combine all those things, it's certainly going to be impactful on our industry's ability to serve not only the economy, but to grow and climb out of this. So I think, we were seeing a bit of movement by the Federal Reserve to tap the brakes. Right now, it feels like Tokyo Drift. I mean, we're hitting the emergency brake and sliding around corners. And it creates a lot of uncertainty, not just within trucking, but throughout the economy. Housing construction is certainly cooling off. Retail pockets of retail are certainly seeing some slow growth. And manufacturing right now is our third bucket of freight, and it seems to be the only area that's continuing to do well. I think the question is for how long. If we do experience an across-the-board slowdown, we could probably see Q1, Q2 of next year to be a very turbulent time. I think we're really right now looking at the severity of what that means, not just to trucking, but our ability to continue serving the economy.
Bob Costello, the chief economist at ATA, seems to think that the possibility of a recession into the spring of next year is 50-50. But we've seen in the trucking industry a drop-off in spot rates recently, but the tonnage numbers on the contract side remain pretty strong. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I would agree, and we're seeing contract freight continue. I think the spot rate is certainly a good indicator, but I think you have to look at the collective number of factors, and I think that's what Bob and team are really analyzing. And I think when he looks at Q1, Q2 of next year, I think if we were to see a recession, which is being talked about pretty widely, he right now feels that it would be a fairly temporary recession, one that we could climb through and out of probably in a couple quarters. So there are so many factors within the economy right now that still remain very strong and are resilient against some of the historic pieces of this, like inflation and fuel costs. That it gives us a little bit of hope and promise that we'll be able to come out of this rather quickly. But we still have at least 3 to 4 quarters to go before we see anything positive in that sense.
One of your passions, Chris, in the time that I've gotten to know you, is that you like talking about government issues, whether it's at a state capitol or here in Washington, D.C. There are some very big issues out there in the trucking industry right now. One of them that we've been following pretty closely is the implementation in California of Assembly Bill 5. And as you've said to me on a couple of occasions, no good laws come out of California. There have been numerous protests at Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Oakland. What's your take on the implementation of AB 5?
Well, I continue to say that, Sacramento is the breeding ground of all bad policy. I haven't seen a thing come out of that town that has helped our industry and our economy. And they continue to set standards that not only impact California, but spill over to that region and the entire country. And we're the recipients of that because we're interstate commerce. So AB 5 is something that is very alarming to our industry's ability to continue operating in California. It is written by trial lawyers. It's vague for a reason, is that it's intended to be litigated. And we're probably not going to see its impact until it goes to court. And we begin seeing decisions come out of court that give us better direction on how this test is going to apply. So if you're an employer out there and you're hiring and employing independent contractors, our advice to them right now, Dan, is to get counsel, retain counsel, and be prepared for this. You do not want to be caught off guard. This will be litigated now. It's the law of the land. We anticipate the injunction being lifted. That's inevitable. There is no discretion there. However, on the governor's side of the equation, there is discretion in whether or not to enforce it. Considering the strain that we're seeing right now in the economy, the supply chain, this would be a very bad time to inject another layer of bureaucracy on top of our industry's ability to keep the supply chain moving. And this is something that President Biden, the White House, is very focused on. If they want to be engaged and make a difference in this, apply some pressure on the governor to not enforce this law. So that will be our message, is to continue to keep it status quo, where we're not enforcing additional conditions that purely, Dan, benefit the plaintiff's bar. So you ask about passion. I love winning. This is one that we didn't win. And so we need to brace for the worst. This is why you have advocacy, however. This is why you have ATA, CTA in California, is to amplify our voice and make certain that our concerns are heard, and in many instances, they're met. In this case, that didn't happen. The Supreme Court didn't take it up. It's now law of the land, and we're just going to have to swallow this pill.
Since you mentioned the Supreme Court, they didn't even hear the case, never got to the high court. And I know they only take a small number of cases every year, maybe about 1 out of every 25 or 1 out of every 30. Were you surprised that with a 6-3 court and a court that generally sides with business, pretty conservative court, that they didn't take this case up?
I was disappointed, not altogether surprised, just because of the caseload, as you just cited. We had a huge victory earlier this year on the COVID mandate. We overturned that 6-3. They did hear our concerns. That was particularly our piece of the filing that was heard by the 9-judge panel, and we won 6-3 as a result of that. So we have gotten through to the Supreme Court. That was a historic win, huge, profound impact that would have had it gone through. So we defeated that. We were optimistic on AB 5 that we would get a fair shake, partly because there were other similar interstate commerce cases that were before the court. We were hoping they're asking the Solicitor General to look into this was an indication that they were serious about taking up or bundling all of those cases and making a carte blanche decision that would have benefited us on AB 5. That didn't happen. So it's now law of the land. Injunction will be lifted, and we're going to continue pressure on the governor in California to not enforce this law. They want to continue to see their economy struggle and the supply chain as a result really see some stoppages. This is a good way to do it. So, we hope it doesn't come to that, but we're going to have to prepare for the worst.
Let's go to the other coast then, onto the Atlantic coast, and a much smaller state, but a case that has potential national implications. They recently completed the federal trial on the truck-only tolling in that state. I've talked to folks up there. They're thinking that they may see a verdict after Labor Day. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, we're communicating and understand the judge's intent is to make a decision by September. So we anticipate that, and we are very optimistic. We had a great trial. We were very well prepared. We had 4 years to really build our narrative, prepare our witnesses. We had great expert witnesses come before and really lay out why this is bad policy. This is unconstitutional. I think we held our ground. The judge had a lot of hard questions for the state, and I think they were very much unable to answer them. But one of the biggest indicators that I came away with from our trial was the fact that we didn't get cross-examined. Our witnesses were that well prepped, that well positioned in their arguments that they didn't want to come up against us, which suggests that had they, it would have done them more damage than just remaining silent. So I think that's very compelling. And I think the judge certainly responded to that. We're going to see real soon where this falls. If he rules in our favor, huge victory. I anticipate the state possibly appealing, but this will be a profound victory that swings the pendulum in our direction. And that's exactly the message we not only want to send in Rhode Island, but neighboring states of Connecticut, New York, others like Indiana to Wyoming that have been looking at similar truck-only tolling schemes that would now be defunct as a result of this decision. So it really does have national implications, even though it's a small state. Others would follow if we don't prevail. So I'm very optimistic we're going to win this one.
So we could see a verdict September, October. That would be what you would expect on the calendar. Now, we should also point out, Chris, this was not a jury trial. This was a bench trial.
That's correct. Yeah, I think the judge's intent is to rule in December, and we should have clear indication as to where this is going to go at that point. So we're optimistic. We have great counsel led by our general counsel, Rich Pianca, and Rich is like most attorneys in that capacity are pretty conservative. I can tell you in talking to him, he was generally pleased with the trial. And just on every level, every witness, all the questions, the lack of cross-examination of our witnesses suggests that we were very well prepared. Listen, if we don't win this, Dan, it is not for a lack of preparation. We've left nothing on the table, and feel very good about the potential outcome.
You mentioned real briefly fuel prices, that they've started to come down. We are in hurricane season, and so far it's been a relatively mild season in the Gulf of Mexico, but any disruption could cause them to spike upwards again. We've seen diesel prices drop 40, 50 cents. Gasoline prices have come down. What's your level of concern here?
Well, it's still year over year, well above. We're talking $1.25 higher in most states. So the national average is still well above where it needs to be to be profitable. And fuel and labor obviously are our two biggest cost headwinds. And so when you have a labor shortage coupled with high fuel costs like this, it's not sustainable, bottom line. And if you're a small carrier or an owner operator, you're operating without a line of credit or significant reserves to carry you through tough times like this, the strain is not sustainable. You're not going to make it through multiple quarters. And that's what we're seeing. So, yeah, it's down. We could see, as you mentioned, Labor Day, it could spike there. Hurricane season, there's a lot of factors ahead that could certainly, resemble an uptick again. Right now, even with the drop, it's still well over where we were a year and a half ago. So another 2 quarters of this, and you're going to start to see some consolidation. And It's just not sustainable. And it's unfortunate because we don't have a domestic energy policy other than zero emissions and zero production. It really is not a good move when you're trying to grow an economy to assume that everyone is going to go out and spend $50,000 to $70,000 on an electric vehicle. That just isn't going to happen. And even if it did, you don't have enough power on the grid or the infrastructure to charge it. So this is a pipe dream. I've said rainbows and unicorns multiple times. This administration does not have an energy policy. And we have an opportunity at home to not only explore, produce, but refine and build a tremendous amount of job base here at home that gets our country out of this rut, but also help our allies, particularly in Europe, that are getting cut off from Russian gas, particularly Poland, Germany, Norway, Sweden. These are countries that are out there on the front line and helping us in this war in Ukraine. And we're leaving them stranded. We could have trade agreements that provide LNG to refined fuel that helps them through this and build a very, very sustainable relationship with these allies for a long time to come. And we're not doing it. Instead, we're over in the Middle East and we're meeting with somebody in Saudi Arabia that's not a good player, not a good partner, in my opinion. And that's not the kind of stability I think our country needs right now. We need a clear energy policy that is domestic based, something we control and defines our future. And we're just not doing it. So that's added headwind that's hurting our economy and slowing our ability to climb out of this rut.
We're now halfway through our conversation with Chris Spear, the president and CEO of the American Trucking Associations. He's in their new offices and new studios, we should point out, in Washington, D.C., and it looks really good there, Chris, as well. Chris, you mentioned electrification, and I want to talk about that with regards to the trucking industry, because it appears as though that many of the OEMs and the truck engine manufacturers, Cummins and companies such as that, are moving forward with electrification or hydrogen in one form or the other, alternative fuels. It seems as though that aside from government mandates and the like, that the private sector is trying to move forward to find a way to, if not get to zero emissions, maybe get to a much lower level in the next 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And this has never, Dan, been a question of if, but when. So dialing back to Sacramento, CARB particularly, the standards that they're putting forth out there in California are just absolutely unrealistic. You just simply cannot meet the timelines. And that's not coming from us as an association that represents motor carriers, but we also represent OEMs, the engine manufacturers, the truck manufacturers, the ones that invest billions of dollars into R&D, the ones that since 1988, I don't know if you knew this, 66 trucks emit today what one truck in 1988 emitted. And that wasn't driven by a heavy-handed regulatory scheme to get us to zero emissions. That was a bunch of good innovators, our OEMs investing in R&D to get our equipment to put out less emissions and to be safer. And that was just the right thing to do. So here's a leading example, very measurable, that shows our industry's desire to get to zero. We're going there. That's the direction we're headed. It's just not going to happen tomorrow. So we need a realistic timeline, not carbs, but something nationally that our country can strive toward, and our OEMs can innovate and get there. Bureaucrats in cubicles don't innovate. They have absolutely no background in engineering. They have no idea what it takes to get from phase 1, 2 to now 3 on nitrogen oxide. We're talking about squeezing blood out of a rock. This is a very, very technical a challenge for our OEMs to meet, and they need time to do it. This is not an unwillingness to work with government regulators. It's just having realistic timelines to get there. When that equipment's made available and our motor carrier members buy it, it has to be well tested. We have to have good engine stringency, because it's not the EPA or CARB that pays to get a truck towed when it breaks down in the middle of nowhere. It's the motor carrier. So those standards, that equipment, have to meet engine stringency tests. Again, bureaucrats and cubicles aren't out there on the road every day. They're not out there in severe conditions, heat, cold, wind, mountains. The conditions that we run this equipment have to have time to be properly tested. You just can't roll this stuff out and expect it to work properly. So that takes time, and we're arguing very aggressively with CARB and EPA to provide us the proper time to meet those conditions. And on electrification, Dan, having the power on the grid to take a truck out of service and get it quickly charged and back out on the road, it just doesn't exist. That infrastructure and the amount of power needed to do that, we're 20, 30 years out from that happening. So let's have an honest discussion. Let's talk about the supply chain, what it takes to get the ingredients for a battery. No more child labor. Let's talk about the end life of the battery. Where do we dispose of it? Is it a hazardous material? Who's liable for that battery? Let's just have an honest discussion from both ends and everything in between, and let's solve the problem. But they don't want to have that. They just want the thing that's shiny in front of them, and that's what they want to talk about. So we got a long ways to go, and we're going to continue to be realistic in telling that story.
It's been almost about 9 months now, though, since the infrastructure bill was signed into law. Are you pleased with the rollout and the way that Secretary Buttigieg and others in the administration have rolled this law out in the speed? And are you pleased with that?
Yeah, I am actually. I think the secretary has been very aggressive around the country, working with states and localities to fund projects, not just roads and bridges, but major infrastructure that trucking relies on, as we're very much intermodal. So, more efficient ports, more efficient rail, waterways, these are all tributaries that feed into trucking. So everything from where we start to finish relies on those investments. And I think the secretary has done an excellent job on that front. What does concern me, however, is inflation. The erosion of the money that Congress let, which was historic. I mean, we haven't seen investments like this in infrastructure since the Eisenhower era. But, with 40-year highs on inflation nearing 10%, the monies that were given are cut, significantly as a result of the condition our economy is in. So you're not getting as much bang for the buck. That's what concerns me, is that we're eroding that investment because we don't have good economic policy in place.
Got a couple of other topics that I want to hit on in the remaining 10 minutes or so that we have left. One of the components in the infrastructure bill is the introduction of allowing young men and women, 18, 19, and 20, to get into the industry and drive across state lines, interstate. Is this effort, this apprentice program and others like it, starting to relieve the job shortage that we hear so much, the driver shortage?
It's one element. I want to be very clear. Our eggs are not completely in this basket. It's one of several things we said and testified on the Hill that have to happen for us to over 10 years to shore up the shortage. Younger talent clearly is a necessity. We need to compete directly with other trades that have access to that talent pool. We don't, because you couldn't cross state lines. Now you can. The law is defined. This national pilot, which will begin in about a month, is something that we believe is going to help bring new talent into our industry, as we have an aging workforce and they're going to be exiting. So if you're not supplanting that, if you're not investing in new talent, you're not going to be able to grow your base. So that is a key component. We want to be clear. Training is essential. We need young talent to be able to safely and responsibly operate this equipment. We're not going to be cutting them loose like you can in 49 states. You have no training or technology standards attached to an 18-year-old operating at Class 8. This would require 400 hours, a lot of safety equipment attached to it. We do have some concerns with what the agency's doing. They're going a little bit beyond what Congress, I think, intended. They're talking about inward-facing cameras. That's something that we are going to comment and oppose. So we do believe that getting this program right and making certain that the paperwork requirements are not too daunting to administer is a good way to seed plant our driver base. We're also going to be looking at urban hiring, not only diversity in race, but gender. We're going to be looking at exiting service people that have that skill set, veterans that have this skill set. We have to supplement it from multiple streams if we're going to be successful in replacing our exiting workforce. So we do believe that this is doable over the next 10 years. So We're optimistic this program is going to be very helpful. We lobbied for it for 5 years. It was bipartisan in both chambers. We defeated all the concerns, and largely, we don't hear anybody rambling about sending 18, 19, 20-year-olds off to a foreign country to defend our freedom. I'm pretty certain we can train our young talent to do that. We can train them to cross state lines in a Class 8.
Two more topics I want to hit on real quickly. Recently, it came out that the number of women driving trucks has increased up to 13%, a nice jump over the last couple of years. And at the same time, the ATA is now forming a new organization, a new council within the scope to help to try and encourage and supplement the recruitment of more women and bring them in. You have an advisory council, and let's talk about that. Then I want to talk about, in our last segment, plaintiffs' lawyers, because I know every time we talk about that, Chris, you get a little angst and aggravated, and it's always interesting when we talk about that. First, talk about the increase in women and what the association is doing to bring more women into the industry.
Well, as I just said, it's one of the many streams that we've got to really target. We've got to be able to make our industry safer and more secure. We have been lobbying very hard to get more funding for truck parking. We got a bill out of the House T&I committee last week, unanimous, something that ATA and OIDA jointly lobbied for. And we're very proud of the fact that we can find issues that, commonly benefit our members, and this is one of them. And there should be an amplified voice there. And Todd Spencer and I got together and decided this is something we've got to do. And we're seeing some fruits of that labor. We're seeing the bill move, and over $700 million for truck parking is going to make it more safe, more secure, better lit. That's going to provide a lot more comfort for women that are perhaps a little bit more hesitant to be out on the road by themselves. So there's a safety and security element to that I think is tied to parking that will benefit bringing more women into the driver force. We just launched Women in Motion. You alluded to that. This is not meant to lead, but complement others, women in trucking included. You cannot have enough voice. I just mentioned OIDA and ATA amplifying our voice on truck parking. The more groups out there that are talking about the benefits of trucking for women and what they can bring to this industry, to the economy, the better. I think that is a healthy thing. It turns up the volume, and having Women in Motion out there is going to be another addition to helping really convince women that this is an industry that you can earn a very sustainable salary with benefits and be part of a bigger family. And so we want to be a voice and explain that to them. So we launched Women in Motion to really be an example for why women can participate in the trucking industry. So this program is going to be something you're going to see more of, Dan, over the coming weeks and months. We bring on the steering committee. It will have a full-time senior director for the program here at ATA. We're taking this very serious, and I think it's going to be very beneficial to growing that segment of our driver pool.
Now on to the issue of tort reform, which I said, Chris, any conversation I have with you, we have to bring it up because you're very passionate about this. You've made this one of your top tier issues. Do you believe that the Federation on the national level and the state associations are making progress in the state capitol, even as the plaintiff lawyers, they continue to be pretty aggressive pursuing these cases in court, and certainly with advertising and beating the drums in terms of the media?
No question. We launched this in the fall of 2019, and be mindful, Dan, we had 2 years of COVID with the economy shut down. So this has not been an easy strategy to roll out when we shifted from a live to virtual environment. Yet our support nationally, the ability to write and build strategies for each state that wants to take forward a proposal before their state legislatures and governors, we have been the coordinator of that. So we basically inverted the strategy where we're not leading it at the national level, although we do amplify it on Capitol Hill. Our votes are underwater here. So this is the reversal of that, going state to state, picking those that have the ability and the votes to get legislation passed. And we've seen some tremendous progress. Iowa, Missouri, Louisiana, Montana, West Virginia, the state of Texas last year had comprehensive reform. We had a great decision in Tallahassee in the Supreme Court just recently that enables the Florida legislature to put forth some good proposals. Georgia, Alabama, we're very optimistic that the momentum is now on our side, but we're not going to get ahead of our skis. This is a 10-year campaign. We're going to pick up to 5 states a year to help support, and we're seeing the fruits of that. That really is a strategy that's paying off and putting the plaintiffs' bar in a reactive mode. They're used to us just rolling over. Those days are gone. That time has passed. These strategies are really to dig in and really fight and put forth some good proposals, starting with educating champions in each state that understand the significance of what this means, that there's no benefit to families, certainly trucking companies and their employees, when nuclear verdicts are awarded. You're putting companies out of business. You're taking food off the table of some of the hardest working patriotic people in this country. And we need to paint that landscape in the clearest sense so people understand that this is all about padding the pockets of trial lawyers. That's it. And this profession is vile, and it's got to stop. And this campaign is meant to expose that and really take a stand by passing laws that are fair. And if it's our fault, we'll make it whole. That's why we carry the insurance we have, and that's why we are good partners in making our roads safer. But the nuclear verdicts are wholly meant to put the company out of business and certainly fill the coffers of the plaintiffs' bar. That practice has got to be exposed, and it's got to stop. So I'm very pleased with where we are just in 3 years' time. I think where we're going to be by the end of the 10-year campaign, they're going to get tired of us. They're going to move on to another segment of the economy that is more inclined to roll over. Have at it, but it isn't going to be the trucking industry. Those days are over.
Chris, we're out of time. We're at the 30-minute mark, and that brings to an end our conversation. It's always good to talk with you. You're always passionate and on point about the items and the issues that you believe are important to the trucking industry. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
In closing, we want to thank our sponsor, Shell, for making this edition of Transport Topics Newsmakers, the webcast, possible. We also want to thank Chris Spear for joining us and answering our questions. This webcast will be available for on demand. Go to ttnews.com for more information, how you can watch this interview with Chris Spear and all of our interviews in the TT Newsmakers series. I'm Dan Ronan, ttnews.com. We thank you for watching.
Thank you for joining us today. For more information on future episodes, visit ttnews.com. This has been Transport Topics Newsmakers.